slow. I cannot let you go away when all I think is you. See, you put me inside into my heart, but my consistency is clean. Doing like the waterfall, always being pumping up. Do your love is killing me slowly. This is Sky 107.1 FM, the passion for broadcasting. We coming to you live from the King Burger building right here on Broad Street. Let me say good morning to you wherever you are on this bright Tuesday morning, the 22nd day of June 2021. Princess Howard Good is my name. I'm going to be here with you up until later, and I will later be joined by our intern patience, Menza. It's about time we bring you 50-50, but in place of the regular show, we bring you this special edition regarding the hearing of the establishment of one economic crimes court in Liberia.
Today's hearing is on the compelling and law to establish an extraordinary criminal tribunal for Liberia, an unmet need for justice in a country that has suffered wars from 1989 to 2013 to 2003, which has yet to achieve closure and accountability. Lest we forget that those youth were like, some quarter of a million Liberians lost their lives. More than 1 million people were displaced during the reign of Charles Taylor, which also Sierra Leone. A comprehensive peace agreement signed in Accra, Ghana, ended the civil war in 2003 and called for the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC. The TRC came into existence 2 years later and in turn recommended that an extraordinary criminal tribunal be set up to achieve accountability for war crimes and atrocities that were committed during Charles Taylor's reign of terror. To date, however, no such tribunal has come into existence, despite legislation passed by the Liberian Congress and pledges by politicians, including current President George Weah, to establish a court. As the fog continues to enshroud Liberia, and alleged war criminals walk the street and occupy high offices. In contrast, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which convicted Charles Taylor for aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity in Sierra Leone, has helped that country heal the wounds of its past divisions. As noted by a 2004 United Nations report on the rule of law and transitional justice, and I quote, consolidation of peace in the immediate post-conflict period, as well as the maintenance of peace in the long term, cannot be achieved unless the population is confident that redress for grievances can be obtained through legitimate structures for the peaceful settlement of disputes and fair administration of justice, close quote. For our part, Congress passed a resolution in 2018, authored by Congressman Dan Donovan of New York, H.Res. 1055, calling for the establishment of an extraordinary criminal tribunal. And a 2017 hearing that I chaired in the Africa Subcommittee addressed the future of democracy and governance in Liberia. Some might ask why we are focusing today on Liberia, a small country of roughly 5 million people, when there are such outstanding problems in other parts of Africa, first and foremost in Ethiopia and Nigeria. And we have focused on those in the past, as I think my colleagues know. The answer, however, is twofold. First, because I believe attention shown by Congress can have a significant and positive impact in Liberia. Second, however, is because the United States owes a moral duty to the people of Liberia. Liberia is unique among all other countries in the world. There is no other country whose history is so intertwined with that of the United States, founded as it was by free American slaves. And just last week, Congress passed and the president signed a law establishing Juneteenth as a national holiday. We have had occasion to reflect upon the history of slavery and liberation. As part of that reflection, we should acknowledge that desire for liberty, which inspired the establishment of the nation, which remains only partially fulfilled. While ultimately Liberia's fate lies in the hands of the Liberian people, today the Lantos Commission, with 4 outstanding witnesses, including the former chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation, a man who is responsible as the chief investigator for the Sierra Leone, the War Crimes Tribunal, for putting charges for years. He is providing testimony, and then we have an outstanding witness who will talk very personally about the impact. She has said, and I quote her, this is Yesendi, that hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And that cannot be allowed to continue. And then, of course, Michael Mueller, chairman of the Global Justice Initiative for Justice, has said, and this is very ominous, what is occurring in Liberia today are parallels of the conflict era in Liberia and represent flashpoints of violent conflicts in Liberia, which must be viewed as early warning signs. I'd like to now yield to my good friend and colleague, Jim McGovern, for any comments. He is co-chair, as you know, of the Lantos Commission, and I yield such time to make it.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And I join Co-Chair Smith in welcoming the witnesses and the public to today's hearing on accountability for war crimes and human rights violations committed during Liberia's 2 civil wars. In November 2018, the House of Representatives passed House Resolution 1055 to encourage the government and people of Liberia to fully implement the recommendations issued by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2008. I was proud to co-sponsor that resolution. Unfortunately, 2.5 years later, there has not been much progress, especially when it comes to establishing the extraordinary criminal tribunal that the TRC specifically called for. This is the case even though a 2019 resolution introduced by Liberian legislators that called for the establishment of the court seemed to have broad support, including from President George Weah. We are here today to reaffirm our support for accountability for the war crimes and grave human rights abuses committed during the civil wars. Those grave abuses included rampant sexual and gender-based violence and pervasive abuses against children who were forcibly recruited as fighters as a matter of deliberate policy. Some non-punitive transitional justice measures have been implemented, such as the Palabra Community Dialogue Initiative, also recommended by the TRC. Some prosecutions have taken place outside of Liberia, like that of Charles Chucky Taylor, who was sentenced to 97 years in prison by a U.S. District Court for torture. But the problem is that many people the TRC said should be prosecuted have not been. And some of those people hold high-level government positions. I hope that we will hear specific recommendations from the witnesses today as to measures that Congress and the U.S. government can take to support broad-based demands for accountability in Liberia. The goal here is not vengeance. Accountability is not about vengeance. It is about fulfilling the rights of victims, and specifically their right to justice. Without justice, it is very hard to get to reconciliation. And without reconciliation, it will continue to be hard for Liberia to move forward. So I want to thank Co-Chair Smith for his leadership on this. I thank the witnesses, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I yield back.
And now I would like to introduce our witness in the order that I introduce you to present your testimony. We'll begin with Yesendi Martin Kepeya, who is co-founder and executive director of the movement. She is also co-founder of Oxygen, a subsidiary of Alliance of Liberian Women International. It provides free education on gender-based violence and educational assistance to underprivileged children and victims from all walks of life. She's a community organizer and director of the Liberian Association of Metropolitan Atlanta, which is the oldest African immigrant community in all of Georgia. In recognition of her advocacy, for example, the Georgia House passed Resolution 465 on March 23rd, 2021, congratulating her for her service. We'll then hear from Jerome Verdier, who is the executive director of the International Justice Group, and former chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Liberia. Mr. Verdier has been instrumental in strengthening civil society advocacy while serving in several capacities as the executive director of Liberia's Democracy Watch, chairman of the board of directors for the National Human Rights Center of Liberia, board chairperson of the Foundation for International Dignity, senior staff attorney for the Association of Environmental Lawyers, Green Advocates, and the first research and program officer of the Catholic Justice and Peace Commission. Mr. Verdier is a practicing attorney credited for rendering pro bono legal services to indigent civil society activists and journalists, while also leading civil society's adversarial teams in several successful lawsuits against the government of Liberia. And again, for the purposes of this especially, he was the former chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Liberia. We'll then hear from Mike Buehler, who is chairman of Global Initiative for Justice and chairman of the Global Outreach and Development Foundation. Born in Liberia, he has held senior positions at Credit Suisse, Citibank, UBS. Mr. Buehler's competence encompasses negotiations on behalf of some African countries, where he has the ability to assist them as a link to Africa, Europe, Asia, Far East, and Middle East. He has a framework of in-depth knowledge and considerable experience of investing, operating, and financing. Mr. Buehler established the Mike Mueller Charities, dedicated to the prevention of all forms of human degradation and exploitation by liberating and uplifting the vulnerable, especially in areas of educational advancement of young children and healthcare. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Alan White, who is the former chief of investigation for the United Nations-backed Special Court for Sierra Leone, and is a retired federal law enforcement executive and a member of the Senior Executive Service. Dr. White currently provides consultancy work as an international criminal justice expert. While serving as the chief of investigation for the United Nations backed Special Court for Sierra Leone in Freetown, Sierra Leone, he directed and supervised all criminal investigations of the Office of the Prosecutors. Those investigations led to the indictment of 13 individuals, including former Liberian President Charles Taylor, who was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 50 years in prison, and that's where he's now. He also assisted with the investigation of Chucky Taylor, son of convicted war criminal Charles Taylor, who was convicted for torture, as my good and friend and colleague Jim has just said, the co-chair. So I'd like to yield, if I could, to Yacindy, and the floor is yours. Advised that Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is on the line, and she would like to give some opening comments.
To both Mr. McGovern, this is a very important hearing, and particularly to me, during the two civil wars of Liberia, having worked specifically during the crisis of Charles Taylor and the murderous behavior with my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus to seek relief from the United States and relief from then the president of Nigeria to have Mr. Taylor removed from Liberia. This topic, again, holds a very special place of importance because the president of the Liberian Association of Greater Houston indicates that there are 8,000 Liberians living in the Greater Houston area. These individuals are in all facets of the economy, and they measurably contribute to our society and culture. Liberia's two civil wars, 1989 to 1997 and 1999 to 2003, caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, spurred widespread displacement, devastated the country's already fragile economy and infrastructure, and led to human rights abuses and economic crimes on a massive scale. Liberians suffered widespread violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, such as mass killings, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, summary executions, mutilation, torture, and use of child combatants. One of the issues that I worked on in coming to Congress early on was the idea of trying to stop child soldiers, and we submitted amendments and legislation that were successful in tying funding to the elimination of child soldiers across the continent, and in particular in Liberia, of the utilization of them, and having some form of sanction or penalty for that utilization. During the wars, 250,000 Liberians died from the fighting. Thousands more were conscripted, as I said, in child soldiers, raped, suffered loss of limb, and other traumatic experiences. 1997 Human Rights Watch report on Liberia for terrorizing the local populations in order to loot and to discourage support for rival factions. The widespread atrocities against civilians included extrajudicial executions, torture, including rape, forced labor, and extortion, sexual and gender-based violence, especially targeted women and girls. These were atrocious, and the very fact that some beyond President Taylor and his son was still not prosecuted is tragic. A 2004 HRW report, thousands of children have been victims of killing and sexual assault. In the aftermath of the wars in 2005, Liberia's legislature established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to examine the root of causes of conflict in Liberia and investigate wartime human rights violations, and made recommendations concerning the prosecution of perpetrators, reparations for victims, and institutional reforms. My sensitivity to reparations makes this particular hearing in the commission very, very important. In its final report released in 2009, the TRC recommended that dozens of individuals be prosecuted in connection with wartime abuses and that dozens be barred from holding public office for 30 years for supporting armed troops. We know that that has not happened. And we also know that in the course of the War Crimes and Economic Crimes Court to try these individuals recommended by TRC for the Commission of Human Rights violations, including violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, war crimes and economic crimes, have not been fully completed. So again, this hearing is important to discern who has not been prosecuted. And we know that to date, not a single war crimes trial has occurred in Liberia as part of the country's judicial process. Grassroots activists and government officials have reignited calls for the War Crimes and Economic Crimes Court. I'm glad that we are looking into this as the Human Rights Commission to be able to bring justice to those who seek it, to bring reparations to those who need it, and to be able to suggest that democracy be restored fully in Liberia. There are so many Liberians here in the United States, and of course we have provided them with the immigration status that we still continue to work on to protect them against violence. But our work is extremely important. I thank my colleagues for bringing this hearing and all the witnesses that we will hear from. We look forward to solutions so that justice can be done. I do want to make knowledge of the first woman president in Liberia, and to indicate the work that she attempted to do on human rights. And so with that, as it relates to Liberia, this is an important hearing, and I look forward to hearing the testimony of all of the witnesses.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now yield to Yacindy Martin K. Peya for her testimony at this time. The floor is yours.
Congressman Smith, thank you. The chairman and distinguished members of the Lantos Human Rights Commission, United States congressional hearing. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity to hear our story, the story of Liberian women and children. We are forever grateful to the Lantos Human Rights Commission for holding this hearing, which will amplify our horrific experience as a nation and people, which collectively justifies the need for the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. Let me also thank the United States government, which gave some of us a second chance. My name is Yacindy Martin Peya. I am here on behalf of the Movement of Justice Advocate for Women and Children, a group that were adversely impacted by the Civil War. We appear before you today to reflect on the work of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, to reflect on the war that robbed me of my childhood, the result for which we struggled. The work for the TRC recommend the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia and created the roadmap to the future of my birth nation. I'm sorry, I think I'm on this computer. Okay, here it is. I printed this out. We check and those that sought refuge from the fight will. I'm sorry, I think hold on, I printed these. Oh, can you go back here? 1 second, this thing will. Nope. Oh, I'm stuck somewhere. This time. Please. Sorry, give me a second. I apologize.
No hurry. Take your time.
No. Apologize. I think this is. Oh. Can I get the, hold on, let me see if I can get the. All right. Okay, I'm gonna read on. In December 1990, my mother gathered my siblings and me together and warned us that there were rebels in the country. They were reportedly coming for the president, Samuel K. Doe. We had gone through horrible experience during the years of Mr. Doe. The streets were turned into killing field with bodies being discovered as days turned into weeks. As the war engulfed Monrovia, children were taken from their parents, drugged, conscripted for killing purposes. Women and children were conscripted or adopted and became properties of fighters on both sides of the conflict. At times, we heard cries of men pleading for their lives. Sometimes we still heard some of those. I still hear some of those voices in my head. On July 31st, 1990, I remember when a doctor from the EOW hospital in Monrovia brought to the Greystone compound an annex of the U.S. Embassy near Monrovia, used as a refuge place, a young man who survived the Lutheran church massacre in Cinco, where over 600 displaced people were cold-bloodedly killed or murdered, hacked to death, slaughtered with hatchets. The gory bodies saw dead bodies nursing one the breasts of them the dead mothers and other attempting to escape through window were held in their track with either gunshot wound or hacked to death. The survivor, Jimmy, had a severe wound that exposed his internal organ. When Jimmy was discovered, he had been butchered by attackers and left for dead without second thought. After months in a Greystone compound, my mother decided it was time for us to leave and seek refuge in Sierra Leone. As we tracked out of the compound in Monrovia, the scene was unbelievable. A river filled with young and old blooded bodies, male and female. We encountered soldiers of rebel group, children with blood-tested eyes with no human empathy or compassion or value for the human sanity. The scene in the movie Blood Diamond madly depicts of our experience. The scene in the movie Blood Diamond provides a mad depiction of my experience. Next, we track out to Brewerville, where we were cut in the middle of a skirmish between two rebel groups. After the fight had subsided, all houses were checked and those that sought refuge from those fights were lined up to be killed. Our witness and afterward, she turned to the next group, but by some miraculous intervention, the commander, Quenevani of the IMPFL, called off the execution of those. cut and line up, including my family and me. This experience shaped my fight for justice. This experience framed my advocacy for women and children. This experience occurred in the first phase of the Civil War. We believe hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Unfortunately, our people are increasingly losing hope for some form of justice. Some of our people are slowly departing this world without realizing justice for their loved ones. In 2020, Tory Ward, an advocate for justice, who lost her father, Dr. Victor Ward, departed this world without seeing justice that she yearned for her loss. Equally, the perpetrator of the war are also passing or getting old, and their memories are fading. Let's continue. As a survivor of the Liberian Civil War, I experienced the result of human shortcoming, the wickedness, depravity that people will outrightly inflict on innocent and harmless civilians in pursuit of power. I witnessed the unimaginable. To the extent to which people exert pain, cruelty, and human suffering on the vulnerable population for temporary pleasure and greed. Those experiences scarred my memory, although those scars are not visible. The psychological effect would be long lasting. It is for the thousands of other Liberian victimized without the benefit of psychological assistance. Psychological assistance, we can surmise that the war was not for redemption or our people based on or the warring fashion that came after the death of President Samuel K. Doe and the crimes they committed for 14 years. We believe Liberia is at a very crucial moment in time. Almost 18 years since the cessation of the war of the civil conflict, nothing has been done to repair the damage. The United States is our last hope, based on our long-standing traditional relationship, and as the leader of the free war, most survivors have reached a boiling point. It is just a matter of time and not when people will start taking the law into their own hands. We speak not only for justice that is long overdue, but to protect the future from what the women and children of Liberia endure and continue to endure. I appear today on behalf of Movement of Justice and victimized women and children to support the process leading to the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court in Liberia. We seek justice not for the victim we seek justice for the victims of Liberia's civil war. We seek justice for those who have departed this war. We seek justice for those loved ones in Liberia. In conclusion, we want to close with the quote from the UN Special Representative to Liberia, Chai Klein, in an interview with World Chronicle in 2004. The poor of Liberia were forgotten for so long. Members of the commission, you can help us remember the poor of Liberia. Support the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court in Liberia to bring accountability. This will provide remembrance of the forgotten. You hold in your hand the future of the next generation. Mine was interrupted. Ours were interrupted. But you are our last hope. Thank you.
Ms. Martin Capella, thank you so much for that very powerful testimony. A reminder that the victims' families, you need justice and accountability for those who have committed these heinous crimes, for being a voice, an articulate voice for movement to establish this court. So I know my colleagues and I deeply appreciate your being here, your courage, and your very, very powerful testimony. I'd like to now ask Mr. Verdier if he would present his testimony.
Members of the congressional from Lantos Human Rights Commission, my fellow witnesses, ladies and gentlemen, we recognize the good work and esteemed contribution of the Thomas Lantos Human Rights Commission, and we should thank you very much for endeavoring to hold this hearing on the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia, and thank you also for inviting us to testify. Liberia is at the moment very critical in time. Victims are passing away without the hope of justice in sight. Also passing on are perpetrators of war crimes. As memories of the war fade, unpreserved evidence are getting lost, and hopes with the likely potential that people are more inclined to taking the law into their own hands. The greatest threat being the likelihood of a return to violent conflict and even more entrenched corruption and the persistent commission of crimes against humanity, which are even prevalent in today's Liberia, along with corruption, which is spiraling out of control. Evidently, because impunity is the order of the day in Liberia. We appear before you today with reflections of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, which recommended the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. The Commission concluded that motivations for the war was not a desire to change our society, but rather an unquenchable thirst for power, greed, and supremacy on the battlefront, which saw the number of fighting forces increase from 2 to a dozen different warring factions before the war was finally concluded. The war in Liberia became profitable as holding public office in Liberia induced widespread violation of serious crimes against the civilian population to benefit from the spoils of war, to attain superiority on the battlefront, and gain promotion and favors from the heads of the warring factions. In the contest for supremacy on the battlefront, factions were rewarded with often described lucrative offices in government, and without any form of accountability. Their portfolio in government became for looting the public coffers and rampant corruption. All factions, we always want to emphasize, committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, including serious violations of international human rights and humanitarian laws, and egregious violations of domestic criminal laws in Liberia. All warring factions, the MPFL, IMPFL, ULIMO-K, ULIMO-J, AFL, LPC, MODEL, LDF, LURD, including the notorious ATU, committed these very horrific crimes, whether it was the recruitment of child soldiers, massacres that were documented, dozens of them across the country, sexual violence, pillaging of the resources of the country, destruction of private properties, mass displacement of civilian population, or torching, burning down of villages and towns. The commission of these crimes was systematic and deliberate. Nothing happened by accident. It was planned and deliberate to achieve a political end and a military advantage on the war front. The war was characterized by injustices and serious human rights violations. The plundering of the national resources, public resources, and the commission of these crimes was organized and perpetrated by fashion leaders. The U.S. Congress, true to the traditional relationship between the U.S. and Liberia, Congress Resolution H. 1005 reaffirmed the strong ties between the two countries and called for the full implementation of the TRC report, especially the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. This singular act has been a rallying point for advocates and was an impetus that led to the House of Representatives in Liberia gathering a majority Black signature to a resolution calling on the government of President George Weah to implement the TRC report as recommended by House Resolution 1055, and we are hopeful that a companion concurrence of the Honorable U.S. Senate will be had sometime soon. Why is a War and Economic Crimes Code necessary? For us, we believe justice is very important. Justice is imperative. While it is true that a code is not a panacea to all the social, economic, and political and governance problems of Liberia, the code, number one, will mark the beginning of breaking the back of impunity in Liberia, which is now well entrenched in the political culture of Liberia. When a code is established, a fair and credible process will help to reinstill and strengthen the rule of law in Liberia. Indeed, when a code is established, Liberia will be fulfilling its international obligation to institute justice and punish crimes. Furthermore, when the code is established, victims and families and communities of victims will receive a measure of relief, healing, and recovery when people are held accountable or brought to justice. When the code is established, we must emphasize the Liberian Republic and the international community will be acknowledging that indeed there is a state of victimhood in the country, and their rights as victims to redress will also be acknowledged. At the establishment of the court, we all will be contributing to durable peace and social healing generally in Liberia. And by that also, we will be supporting and strengthening the capacity of local judicial actors and national judicial institutions in Liberia. It is worth noting that the implementation of the TRC recommendations or the War Economic Crimes Code is being delayed because amongst the greatest reasons these recommendations are stalled is because of the lack of political will to make hard decisions for the good of the people and society. And of course, fear and interest. Some people genuinely believe that implementing the recommendations of the TRC will spark conflict of war, while there are others, like those in the authorities, who have vested interest in impunity and crimes, or are connected to or linked to the war as perpetrators of war and economic crimes. The lack of political leadership, the issue of impunity and corruption is also a reason why recommendations that are being implemented. We'd like to advance our thoughts on what must be done. We believe there must be an increased pressure on the government of Liberia for the full implementation of the TRC report, especially the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Code, which will go a long way in addressing the abuses of the war and economic crimes which are even being committed to this state. Our politicians and those in authority, they have vested interest in impunity and crimes because they are equally corrupt and they do not hope to be prosecuted or held accountable in the future. So for them, it's a business. Resisting the War Crimes Code, failing to implement the TRC recommendations is a business of preserving their status and the stolen wealth they have taken from the Liberian people. A concurrence of U.S. Senate with the resolution of Congress will bring increased political pressure on the government to take action and act most appropriately. Consistent civic engagement of civil society actors with the moral guarantors of the peace process in Liberia. That include the US government, the United Nations, ECOWAS, AU, and EU, to get involved or re-engage with the peace process, which is still in transition because a lot of the prescriptions of the peace agreement have not been implemented, including that of the TRC. We think it will be necessary that they get involved in the process, and maybe if possible, the International Contact Group of Liberia be reactivated. We have come to observe that the current leadership in Liberia, without any force or pressure, will not yield to this popular demand of the international community and the Liberian people. We believe what is going on in Liberia is a gangster operation that lacks, one, the moral conviction, the social consciousness, and the political will to fully implement the TRC recommendations or establish the War on Economic Crimes Court. In closing my remarks, I'd like to again thank the co-chairs of this commission for inviting us and for being far-sighted to know that it's important that we hold these hearings and zero in on the War on Economic Crimes Code recommendations of the TRC. Because with impunity, without the rule of law, the Liberia in the near future will return to violent conflict. The UN 2004 report on the rule of law and transitional justice said that experience in the past, quote, experience in the past decade has demonstrated clearly that the consolidation of peace and the immediate post-conflict period, as well as the maintenance of peace in the long term, cannot be achieved unless the population is confident that redress for grievances can be obtained through legitimate sources for the peaceful settlement of disputes and the fair administration of justice. This is the vision of the War on Economic Crimes Code, because we know it's not going to rely on the corrupt inclinations of the Liberian government. It's going to be a partnership that will involve the international community. It's going to be a credible institution that will indeed render peace and justice and reconciliation to the people of Liberia. Thank you very much, distinguished co-chairs, for inviting me. I rest with my testimony.
Chairman Xavier, thank you for, again, that very, very powerful testimony. Thank you for chairing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which at the time, and I was in Congress at the time, we all were in awe of your work, of your recommendations. It was clear, it was compelling, and yet to this day, as you've pointed out, it has not been fulfilled, especially with regards to the due court. Thank you for warning about the ominous implications of doing nothing. scans, which has happened year in and year out. So your words are heard not just in Liberia, but throughout the world and right here in Washington, D.C. Do appreciate the power of your presentation and of your work. I'd like to now ask Mr. Mueller if he would provide his testimony to our commission.
Thank you, Congressman Smith. Thank you for inviting the Global Initiative for Justice to testify at this hearing. Special thanks to you, Congressman Smith, and also to Congressman Govern in making this hearing a bipartisan one. I have sent in my rating statement and will highlight few points as for the time given to my disposal. The Global Initiative for Justice was incorporated as a nonprofit in the state of Maryland with the sole purpose to fight for the full implementation of the TRC report, respectively establishing the War and Economic Crime Court in Liberia, as well as monitoring human rights abuses in the country. As I am updating myself daily on the news on what is happening in the United States, there is a lot of talks ongoing about your southern border. Whether it is a crisis or not, it is not for me to judge. But you, as direct representative of the people of the United States, I am sure you have some concern of what is unfolding. And I am certain that you all are putting a closer look and sure you will find collectively a solution as things unfold. That is why we in the diaspora are also putting a closer eyes on Liberia and monitoring what is unfolding out there on a daily basis and also at its neighboring countries. We all still have these devastating picture of the war in mind, which led in destabilizing region. Today, Liberia is led, and including alleged former warlords, using political power to appropriate the wealth of the country through embezzling or misappropriating government funds at the expense of the Liberian people. Most likely donor funds, which one can say also US taxpayer money. Through this behavior, obviously, the economic hardship grows on a constant basis. Also, one should not underestimate the significant human rights abuses relate to the latest human rights report of your State Department. People are living in fear. Even opposition politicians cannot express themselves freely. We are in constant contact with these people as well. They are beefing up their personal security. The culture of impunity is widespread and there is no accountability. Liberia today is becoming a lawless nation without any value nor principle for the future generation. Imagine what a negative spiral that is unfolding, which should not be underestimated nor putting a blind eye onto it. This situation could once again turn back into the dark past should the necessary steps not be taken immediately. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights as the Universal Declaration states. The people of Liberia are being denied the dignity and rights for too long. The time is now to establish the War and Economic Crime Court to close the dark past and open the door for a new future where justice can prevail. I am dearly calling on this body to do whatever it can to send a signal of encouragement to the people of Liberia that justice will be done in the nearest future. Only one statement of the former President Bush changed the entire narrative of the Liberian war. As we are going to continue our pressure campaign on the government of Liberia, we are kindly requesting this noble body to join the fight. Many of you are proponents of the global Lantos Human Rights Accountability Act. I believe that this act is a strong instrument that is needed to put upon the highest level of government official in joining hands with our pressure campaign. This will show the people of Liberia that the historical ties between our two countries is still alive, and upholding the rule of law is essential, and the human dignity and rights is not only written on paper, but there are responsible women and men like you that are willing to act on it in support of upholding the rule of law globally. I do strongly hope that this commission will do all in her power to bring outer darkness into the light. Once again, thank you for affording me this opportunity to testify today. I yield back.
Mr. Mueller, thank you very much for your testimony, your recommendations, your good charitable work. Your mention of the Global Magnitsky Act is something that both my co-chair and I have worked very hard to get enacted into law, and believe it has been underutilized and ought to be used much more robustly. So your admonishment on that, I think, is very timely. And also, again, you point, as other witnesses so far have done, to this culture of impunity and how widespread it is. People deserve better than what they're getting in Liberia. So thank you so much for that. Now I'd like to yield the floor to our final distinguished witness, Dr. White. Again, he is the investigations that led to the jailing, the incarceration of Charles Taylor for 50 years. I'll never forget when I saw the picture of Charles Taylor when he heard the news, the verdict of 50 years. Never thought that would happen to a president of a country, and yet it did. And the court did an amazing job in bringing justice to so many. But as we all know, and as the Mr. Verdier made so clear as the chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there's unfinished business. So if I could now yield to Dr. White, look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Congressman Smith. First of all, I'd like to commend you and co-chair Congressman McGovern in this commission and the members of the commission for holding these hearings. They're extremely important. You've been the strongest advocate for human rights and justice in Liberia, I must admit, and your work has been very well and very much appreciated. You also, with Congressman Donovan, led to the passage of H.R. 1055, which supports the Economic and War Crimes Court of Liberia. In line with the theme, I strongly believe that in order for Liberia to move forward, as it did in Sierra Leone, it'll have to reconcile with its past. It must do so through the prism of accountability and justice. For the past 40 years, Liberia suffered multiple civil wars, unspeakable atrocities, despair, massive corruption, and the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. Yet there's been little or no accountability for those who caused this devastation. Many of those involved in civil wars who led the death and destruction of Liberia continue to walk the streets today, many of which are in high-level government positions. As a result, their previous acts of criminality without accountability and justice only promote and foster the perception of impunity. In the first civil wars from 1989 to 1996, Liberia lost 250,000 of its citizens to a senseless civil war, and thousands more were lost during the second civil war in 2000 to 2003. Both of these wars had a common denominator, and that was Charles Taylor and his criminal enterprise. Many of those involved who directed or participated in committing atrocities and crimes against humanity against their fellow Liberian citizens are well known and yet to be held accountable. This devastation spilled over into Sierra Leone, and a total of 1.2 million victims were left in its wake. Those perpetrators who committed unspeakable and horrific acts would like for you to forget their misdeeds and move on for the sake of the country, claiming and establishing a war crimes and economic crimes court would plunge Liberia back into civil war. The same argument typically led by the perpetrators was often heard in Sierra Leone until we arrested the key perpetrators and brought them to justice. On March 10, 2003, we launched Operation Justice in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and arrested 9 of 13 indictees, one of which was Chief Hinga Norman, who was a Minister of Internal Security and arguably the most powerful man in Sierra Leone at the time. He was also the leader of the Civil Defense Force, which had 10,000 fighters comprised of local hunters who were created to defend the Sierra Leonean people from the rebels. However, they became perpetrators committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. We were told repeatedly that if we ever tried to arrest Chief Hinga Norman, that the CDF and its 10,000 fighters would retaliate and start a new civil war. However, on March 10, 2003, Chief Hinga Norman was arrested at his office, the Minister of Internal Security, and flown on a helicopter to Both Island and placed in detention. There was no uprising, only jubilation in the streets when the people of Sierra Leone heard about his arrest on BBC West Africa. We hear the same argument today in Liberia, most from those who fear justice and accountability. So this argument has proven to be false and without merit, especially when the people want justice and accountability. What we learned during the investigations conducted by the Liberian Truth and Reconciliation Commission was that the people wanted accountability and they wanted justice. Despite the Accra Comprehensive Peace Agreement requirements and subsequent legislation enacted by the Liberian legislature requiring that they be implemented, most specifically the establishment of the War and Economics Crime Court remains elusive. This was in 2009. 12 years later, the law continues to be ignored and the victims and their families are continually denied accountability and justice. The elected officials, including President George Weah, who campaigned in 2017 on establishing the War and Economics Crimes Court, continues to ignore the law and the will of the Liberian people to establish the court. There has been a recent awakening by the people of Liberia and a real grass movement by those who remember the dark days of the civil wars and the denials of those involved, such as current sitting Senator Prince Johnson, who killed many innocent civilians, including recent reports of murdering Linda Jury, an American aid worker in October of 1990 in Liberia. Also, we cannot forget the unfortunate murder of John Offrey, an American, in Monrovia on May 25th, 2004. Offrey was leading a delegation from the U.S. Department of Defense to conduct a military assessment of the armed forces of Liberia. His death was a result of a failed assassination attempt to kill me because of my active investigation of Charles Taylor while I was serving as the Chief of Investigations of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. I was alerted early in the day from confidential sources that I'd been under investigation for days and assassins would be coming to my room in Mamba Point that night to kill me. So I left immediately, and unfortunately, my room was given to John Offrey. It was covered up, but the Liberian government at the time reported as a robbery gone bad. So there was no follow-up investigation, only a couple of individuals arrested, one of which reportedly died being poisoned in jail. There have also been recent reports that those very assassins are in high-level positions working in the current Weah administration. This information has been provided to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The Offrey family is also aware of these recent revelations and are considering further action in pursuit of justice. Liberians yearn for retributive justice as well as restorative justice. In simple terms, they want those who committed the heinous atrocities to be punished and the rule of law to return and equally applied to everyone. Without accountability, justice, and the rule of law, no country can function properly, develop or prosper, let alone encourage foreign direct investment. The establishment of the War and Economics Crime Court must be established in the same manner as a special court for Sierra Leone by treaty with the United Nations with the authority to prosecute international crimes against humanity. Appointments of the prosecutor, registrar, and the majority of the judges must be done by the UN Secretary General to mitigate corruption, coercion, and ensure transparency. This will allow the court to reestablish the rule of law and in Liberia, ensure accountability of those who perpetrated death, destruction, and caused civil war. Also, the Economics and War Crimes Court will be able to ensure accountability for those who stole funds and property to self-enrich themselves at the expense of the Liberian people and return those funds and assets back to the Liberian people. We have seen how powerful and important justice and accountability is for the victims of any civil war. I saw it firsthand in Sierra Leone and how much it meant to the victims to witness powerful people who killed their loved ones be brought to justice. Although the special court for Sierra Leone was not perfect, it did carry out justice impartially, transparently, and prove that the rule of law is more powerful than a barrel of a gun. Achieving justice and accountability has allowed Sierra Leone to reconcile with its past and move forward. It is absolutely vital in order to move forward, you must remember the past. Look at the progress Sierra Leone has made in trade and development since the end of the Civil War and the establishment of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Over and over again, we heard daily from the people of Sierra Leone, justice delayed is justice denied. And we never forgot that message as we carry out our work in Sierra Leone and throughout the region. Many other countries are pursuing similar justice. For example, the Central African Republic established a special criminal court for CAR to prosecute those responsible for crimes against humanity during their most recent civil war. The people of CAR, despite their economic despair and lack of development, demanded justice and the establishment and reestablishment of the rule of law. With this grassroots efforts and demands for accountability and justice, the people persuaded their elected officials to establish the Special Criminal Court and successfully obtained support of the United Nations and various other nations, such as the United States. When the people are determined and demand justice, they can achieve it. I strongly believe that the people of Liberia demand accountability, justice, and the establishment of the War and Economics Crimes Court, already passed by the TRC, and it needs to be implemented. And the U.S. State Department supports the establishment, as well as the United Nations expressed in August of 2017 about the lack of progress of justice and supports the establishment of the court. We just need to get the Liberian people to demand justice and accountability and pressurize their government leaders to establish the War and Economics Crimes Court. It is clear that the current administration is not serious about establishing a court. However, there have been public figures demanding the establishment of the War and Economics Crimes Court, including Alex Cummings, who's a leader of the coalition of the political parties, and other organizations such as the Liberian National Bar Association, religious organizations, and civil society members. They want to bring an end of impunity, reestablish the rule of law, and hold those accountable for the atrocities committed during the Civil War. The people want to move forward and see their country developed, prosper. However, until this nation heals and reconciles with its past, it will not happen. So the demand for justice and accountability is loud and clear, and the people of Liberia are demanding that those who committed the atrocities that led to devastation of Liberia are held accountable. Justice is delivered, and those assets and money stolen from the country are returned to its rightful owner, the people of Liberia. Thank you again, Congressman Smith and Congressman McGovern, for your outstanding leadership and support.
Dr. White, thank you very much for your leadership, for enduring credible death threats. And as you pointed out, there was a man, the Department of Defense, who was killed in your stead after the warning came to you. And I think it's outrageous that those kinds of things happen, but they do. But that's a further testimony to your and to others like Mr. Vidir, who have just valiantly stood up to these oppressive forces that make threats and sometimes are able to carry them out. I thought your point about Operation Justice, where you arrested 9 of the 13 indictees, including Chief Hinga Norman, after the threats that were made, retaliatory threats were made, certainly points a way. Fear has to stop dominating. Indifference is one thing, but fear is another. It needs to be stopped when it comes to this laissez-faire attitude that is so often taken. So I would like to, all of you have presented absolutely compelling testimony that I hope will serve as a pivot point for our government, the United States government, to do more, to say enough is enough. I thought, Mr. Mueller, your point that the culture of impunity is widespread. And Mr. Vidir, when you said that hopes are waning, there's, things could get far worse and very quickly unless there is significant efforts made to address this ongoing impunity that seems to be getting worse based on your testimonies. I also, and maybe you would all speak to this, but George Weah, there are very credible allegations about corruption lodged against him and his government, many people in his government. When we put out information about that several months ago, the reaction was very attack-filled, and not only got me and my staff more committed to, on behalf of the people of Liberia, ensuring that wherever there's corruption and a lack of accountability for despicable war crimes, that we redouble our efforts. So I do hope this hearing will serve as a pivot point. I think, Mr. Vidir, your point about concurrent work on the Senate side was very well taken. We do know that Ellen Sirleaf Johnson moved to establish the court. Perhaps some of you know that. There has been a long lag from when the Truth Commission did its amazing work to this point today in terms of administration. So perhaps you can enlighten us as to why it didn't happen before either under her administration. I also, if any of you have lists of people, credible listing of individuals that you think need to be given over to the Biden administration for action, I do hope you would provide us with that, especially as it relates to the Magnitsky Act. As you know, the ability to, or the lack of ability that's embedded in the Magnitsky Act to do business with U.S. entities and the inability to travel here, a visa ban, are not perfect, but they are very potent sanctions that can be levied against individuals. So consider this an engraved invitation to each of you to provide this commission with those names that we can pass them on to the administration, hopefully for prompt and very quick action. I know when I was working very hard in the DR Congo, and that's obviously ongoing work for all of us. I was chair of the Africa Subcommittee, I'm a ranking member. There are people who are on the Magnitsky list that were very, very upset about it and wanted to be taken off. I remember being at an OSCE Parliamentary Assembly meeting, and we had a face-off with the Russian delegation, and at least 3 of the people who were on the Russian side had been sanctioned under the Sergei Magnitsky Act. So, and we're not very happy with us. Too bad. So let's work on that. And so that's as my first question about names, what we should be doing from here. And again, I'd like to yield to each of you. I'll start with Dr. Alan White first. Since you went last in terms of presenting testimony, if you wouldn't mind beginning the response.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Smith, for your words of wisdom here and support. Certainly, there's speculation as to why it wasn't enacted, but I think Chairman Vidir will be able to comment on that. She was certainly referenced in the report, so there has been indication that perhaps somebody does not want to start something that might come back to cause them problems. And there's certainly some indication of that. Now, in fairness, we do know during that time frame, there was a lot of reconciliation that was attempted. And of course, they underwent the serious outbreak of Ebola. So there were some legitimate concerns, but it still doesn't relieve the requirement by law to have this War and Economics Crime Court enacted immediately. Let's just move on now to right now to get it done. Excuses are over. It needs to be implemented. And with Congress support, we think we can get it done, both on the House and the Senate side, but certainly the House has been leading the charge on this. And that's what I would like to dwell on, at least for me, is let's make this happen. Let's get it going. Let's hold these people accountable. Let's get Liberia like Sierra Leone, where they can move on, they can reconcile, they can develop, and they can attract foreign direct investment and get on with their life. Thank you.
Mr. Bueller, did you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Congressman Smith. Actually, I just want to highlight 2-3 issues. Number one, as I stated, just by the statement of former President Bush, the entire narrative of the war changed. And we're really appealing on the US government in whatever form in declaring a statement that will encourage the people of Liberia that there is hope, a light at the end of the tunnel. Number two, it's a very great affront against the people of Liberia. As I've already mentioned, the Magnitsky Act, which was executed on Senator Varney Sherman and now being elected as the chair of the Judiciary Commission in the Senate. And I believe the ambassador of the US have made a statement towards that. And also the alleged former warlord Prince Johnson, who is now spearheading the situation on defense. I mean, this is a situation which creates additional fear in the people of Liberia, and that's including senators and representatives that are in support of the War and Economic Crime Court, but based on what is unfolding, they are fearful in speaking out because of their life. So these are the 2 points I just wanted to highlight additionally in sense of understanding.
So,
thank you very much.
Mr. Mueller, if I could just ask, are you suggesting, like Bush, if President Biden, for example, were to make a very strong statement for the establishment of the court, that could have a very positive impact?
Yes, sir, Congressman, definitely.
Thank you. Mr. Vidir. Could you unmute? Mr. Verdier, if you could unmute.
Okay, I think I'm okay.
You're right.
Your post-testimonial comments were very insightful, and I'd like to draw in on President Sirleaf. I believe she was conflicted because the report was completed just about the time she ran second term. And she was named in the report because of her role with Charles Tito. And it was recommended that she stay away from public activities, from running for public offices. But she ignored that and still ran. But notwithstanding, during her term, she complied with a portion of the law that required the president, to make a report to come to the legislature every 3 months on what is being done to implement the TRC report. She did it 3 times, in which she set up a committee to review the report, and then she issued a statement that the report was very good. Implementing all the recommendations was necessary for the lasting peace and stability of Liberia. So those 2 reports were made, but nothing else was done. And President Weah hasn't done anything, even to make report to the legislature as to why he is not moving forward with the recommendations. And beyond that, the government of Liberia had attended the UN Human Rights Commission meeting and promised that a definite position will be made on the TRC. To date, none of such position has been made. they are still equivocating, and it is clear that they have no commitment to moving forward with the recommendations of the TRC. President Salif Haho's situation, he is the president now, he has inherited it. Government is a going concern, so the issue has to be pushed forward by him. And my colleague is right, Muller, that consistent pressure and force from the US will go a long way, including Magnitsky's sanctions. That could be a form of pressure on the Liberian government because corruption is prevalent, and of course, they are hoping to benefit from impunity. Thank you, sir.
Liberia misleads on justice at UN Human Rights Review on March 17, 2021. So that just happened. Is that what you were referencing? Just for the record, Mr. Vidir?
I didn't get it. You are muted.
Oh, okay. I was asking whether or not, when you mentioned the United Nations, was that the most recent Human Rights Watch put out a piece on March 17th of this year?
Yes.
That Liberia misleads on justice at UN Rights Review.
Yeah.
That's what you were referencing. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Good. Thank you. Without objection, we'll put that statement by Human Rights Watch into the record. And I would like to now ask Ms. Kane Peya, if she could comment.
Thank you so much, Congressman Smith. I am grateful that you allowed us or make this possible. I believe that at this point, like I said before, hopelessness is the enemy of justice. As an advocate, I wake up every morning to a child being raped or sodomized or killed. For anywhere 1 year or 2 years old. And there's a saying now in Liberia that goes, this too is Liberia, meaning nothing will be done. Nobody will come to you. We have majority of those people that we experienced during the war, whose voices we heard, who murdered and painted the street with blood. Now they're senior senators, they're head of defense, they're head of security and financial institution. You have people who are working without pay 12 and 10 months. I strongly believe, it took one call from President Bush to get an answer. America, created a Liberia as an oasis for Black people, for free slave, a place to return to, for peace and progress. And we have gone back even further than we were when we started the country. We believe in you. We believe in your leadership. You are the leader of the free world. But let me say before I attend that, Congressman, your voice have given some of us hope. Liberia has waken up. We have been beaten down so much that we don't have anywhere else to go but to go up. We are afraid. The women are afraid. Our children have no hope. We need the War and Economic Crimes Court. We need some sort of closure. And whatever needs to be done, America gives out hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year to support Liberia. That money goes to politicians' pocket. They divide among themselves. As we speak, there are about $15,000 and $30,000 that is being divided among congressmen, and they have no excuse for it for individual projects. At the same time, most of them make more money than you, who are in charge of over 30 million people for 5 million people, and they have nothing to show. And our people are dying. There are no hospital. The hospitals have no bed. If you go to the hospital now, they turn you back. Where is the money? Where are the resources? And our kids are living in graveyards. Our babies are living in graveyards. They're on drugs. They're allegedly lawmakers that are selling drugs. That's alleged. But we have people who are willing to testify. We have people who are calling into Dr. White. Our people are growing the strength to fight back because we have nothing else. We are marked for death if you don't help us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McGovern, Chairman McGovern.
Thank you very much. Let me apologize in advance. I've got like construction going on outside of my window here, so I hope you can all hear me okay. I think, one of the things that Chairman Smith and I should do is maybe request a briefing from the State Department as to kind of what they're doing and what they're not doing. And certainly it seems to me that global Magnitsky sanctions could be utilized in this case, and we ought to figure out what the plans are. But and I also think the other challenge is how we need to the need to find a way to strengthen public support within Liberia for a war crimes tribunal, which is clearly warranted. But let me ask this. I mean, Liberia is a state party to the Rome Statute and the International Criminal Court. And in the event that the extraordinary tribunal is not established, would you support having the ICC open an investigation into war crimes in Liberia? Is anybody?
Congressman,
Yes.
this is Alan White. The problem with the ICC is that they weren't created legally until July of 2002. So it's a jurisdiction issue right now. Now, certainly there are some things that have happened modern day that they could be held accountable for, but the majority of the crimes that were committed, that were documented in the TRC, occurred between 1989 and 2003.
Okay.
So that's a jurisdiction issue. And so it's something that maybe in the future.
All right.
Now, just like the Sierra Leone court, we already have a roadmap to set this up. And it's relatively easy if they follow that roadmap to do that. And the U.S. was very, very strongly supportive of the special court because of our historical ties. I would think that they would be even more establish this court. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Well, let me ask as a follow-up, what role, if any, do you think that the international community should play in the extraordinary tribunal if it's established? Would you recommend that foreign judges or other legal personnel staff the tribunal? Should international personnel be involved in any of the investigations?
Absolutely. The way it was set up in Sierra Leone, and they did not give up their sovereignty, so that's not an issue. The court was actually set up in the capital in Freetown, and it was established as a hybrid court, which means we could prosecute internationally and also nationally. But it was done with a treaty. And all that needs to be done, this is what's so different about this. The legwork has already been done with the TRC. What President Weah needs to do is send a letter to the Secretary General requesting his assistance in setting up a treaty or setting up a war crimes and economic crime court. That could be done with a treaty between the government of Liberia and also with the Office of Legal Affairs, just like in Sierra Leone. The roadmap is perfect. The prosecutor, the registrar, and the majority of the judges should be appointed by the Secretary General in consultation with the government of Liberia. That way we ensure that we mitigate the risk of coercion, bribery, and make sure that it's transparent, which is exactly what we did earlier.
Okay. And this is to anybody on the panel. I mean, can you just tell us, what is the status of documentation of war crimes in Liberia right now? I mean, is there more that needs to be done to record testimonies and preserve evidence? I'd just like to know kind of where that whole process is. Anybody could.
Yes, Congressman.
Yes.
Thanks for that question. What I would say is that enough documentation was done by the TRC, but since the work of the TRC, there have been other groups who continue. International Justice Group continues to document human rights violations, crimes against humanity that are committed in Liberia currently. But beyond that, the TRC did a substantive work on atrocities and documented them that were committed during the war.
All right. Let me ask this other question. Does anyone here have any recommendations for psychosocial support and reparations for women and girls who were victims of gender-based violence during the civil wars, or for the children who were abused by being made to fight? Are you working in any of these areas, Anybody on the panel?
Cody will speak about that.
Yeah.
But the TRSD has substantive recommendations on that for
Okay.
psychosocial support for victims of heinous crimes.
And and let me just ask this one final thing. So I understand that 3 of you have official roles in the International Justice Group. I think you've established that. Do you coordinate your efforts with other human rights or victims' rights organizations in Liberia or internationally? And how are you working to strengthen public support within Liberia for a war crimes tribunal?
If I may allow.
Mr. Mueller.
Actually, in the diaspora, we're working together with several groups in the United States as well as in Europe, and also with civil rights organizations in Liberia. And obviously, I'd like to put a point on the Liberia Bar Association, which have now taken the lead in mobilizing the people come June 24th, which is just around the corner, to actually have 100,000 man march to deliver to the Liberian legislature the draft law to establish the War and Economic Crime Court. And after saying that, and I mentioned here in the people, this is definitely an exercise where the U.S. Embassy can put an eye on that march that's going to take place on the 24th, encouraging the people to exercise their constitutional rights in sense of a peaceful assembly and marching towards the capital and to deliver that draft law.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
Yes, Honorable McGovern, may I come in, please?
Yes.
We also have LOJA, which is Liberia United for Justice. The head is in Canada. They collected over 30,000 signature. They're trying to collect about 1 million signature.
Mhm.
They were in Liberia for like a month and a half. They are back and forth. They have protested like for 3 years straight in a row, and they're always in Liberia. They go like every 6 to 7 months. In fact, the last time they were there, they have to find a way to escape because they were looking to arrest them. They said they had COVID. They had to find a way to sneak through the borders to go to the nearby country to be able to leave the country. And in fact, last year, March, they were brutalized, especially the leader were beaten by the EPS, which most of them, especially the guys that beat him up, were people who also took part in the war. As the chairman, Chairman Smith said earlier, most of the EPS, which is the special security to the president, most of them are former rebel leaders or killers who kill our people. So it makes it very difficult for our people are rising up. Yes, we are coordinating with people, not just around in the diaspora, but also on the ground. And the ground team is working diligently. And we have students that are getting involved in collecting signature to make sure that the world understands that Liberia is ready for this war and economic crimes court. We need answer.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, and I think the challenge is not just the diaspora, but also people on the ground. How do we increase the pressure? But look, let me just I appreciate the insights here, and I think we have some follow up to do in this commission. But as I said at the beginning, we need accountability, and without accountability, there can't be justice, and without justice, you can't have reconciliation. So this is all vitally important. And again, I thank Co-Chair Smith for arranging this hearing, and I thank all of you for your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chairman McGovern. If there's anything else any of our distinguished witnesses would like to add, I do remember meeting with David Crane, who was the chief prosecutor a number of times, and just like Dr. White was under constant death threat. He refused to let that alter his commitment to justice and to the people of Liberia and Sierra Leone, because obviously with the hybrid fashion that the court was able to reach in and prosecute Charles Taylor. But I would say, Victor Hugo once said, there's nothing as compelling as an idea whose time has come. The idea for this came when Jerome, when his Truth and Reconciliation Commission made its recommendation, and it should have been acted on immediately. And delay becomes profound denial, and that's where we're at right now with this. The idea of this hearing, frankly, is to jumpstart the pivot to make sure that the international community, starting with the United States, is very focused on making sure that the people of Liberia get accountability, justice for the gross violations of human rights that they have endured, and the ongoing kleptocracy that we're seeing, the ongoing stealing of the people's purse, which we know is happening, and many of you have made reference to it. Some of you have made reference to it, and you know that money and that wealth needs to be for the people, not for the politicians who are in the position to steal it. So again, I would hope that we would, use this hearing as a pivot point. I know that I look at the press and I see how I've been savaged, and that only makes me more determined, frankly, especially when Dr. White and so many others are just so, they have endured literal death threats. And I know, it has not deterred them. It's actually motivated them to do even more. Great people of Liberia deserve better than the government that abuses them or refuses, in this case as well, to provide accountability for the terrible atrocities that have been committed. So I would just leave it to our witnesses, each of you, if you wanted to say one final comment. I'm now advised again, but I don't see her on the board, that Sheila Jackson might want to make a comment. Congresswoman Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, I have been on the board consistently.
Well, you're not on the board here, so thank you for sending a message.
I can't seem to get called upon in the regular order. So I know that we're going to have to try and get organized in this manner, because I'm consistently on and consistently ignored.
Well, there was no one ignoring you here, and I'm glad, however, you made us aware of it. We know. Joe, please. You're recognized.
Thank you. Let me find out from Mr. White, what is the opposition, or what is the status of the present government in terms of not moving on this port? I don't think this has been fully vetted from my understanding.
Well, from my understanding, this government, not my understanding, it's factual. The current president campaigned on establishing the War Crimes Court in 2017. And there had been offers to assist and support that, and those offers have fallen on deaf ears. If you will also recall, in September of 2019, when President Weah attended the General Assembly of the United Nations for, I think it was about 20 plus minutes of his 30-minute speech, he asked the international community for support in setting up this War Crimes and Economic Crimes Court. And as soon as he got back to Liberia, that was one of the first questions that was asked by the press, and he denied that he ever said that. So there seems to be a real disingenuous effort to want to move this court forward, and it's been very disappointing that this has not happened. The will of the people, they have, as you've heard earlier, there's going to be 100,000 people, grassroots movement from all 15 counties in Liberia, that will peacefully protest, which is being led by the Liberian National Bar Association on the 24th, to issue a petition to the government to immediately implement this court. So that's unfortunately where we are. We haven't seen any meaningful assistance. I've had personal dialogue with the government, given them suggestions, and I have seen absolutely no movement at all to enact the War and Economics Crime Court.
So as we are having this hearing, the Tom Lantos Commission and McGovern, which is renowned around the world, what would be, legislation has its place, but in the mix of having immediate impact, what would be the immediate impact to get the president unconfused about the words that he had offered in the public setting?
Well,
Liberia.
Well, I think what the immediate impact would be, it would demonstrate to the people there's some semblance of reestablishing the rule of law, because this law, the TRC recommendation is law. It needs
Yeah,
to be.
now what I'm saying is, excuse me,
Sure.
I was not clear and I apologize to you. What would be the action of this commission that would cause some immediate response that would indicate the seriousness? There's legislation, but we do that very well. But in the course of where we are today, what would be an immediate action that the commission could take as legislators here in the United States under the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission?
I think you could tie the establishment of the court funding would be one thing from the U.S. government. They are required to establish this. So as we do in other ways, funding is a very powerful tool. I think a public statement by this commission would be very powerful. And as Congressman Smith had indicated earlier, maybe reaching out to the administration to have them go public in supporting the establishment of this War and Economic Crimes Court. I think those are some immediate things that remedies that could take place. And of course, the GLOMAG, we will provide information to this commission supporting GLOMAG on senior government officials because of the ongoing corruption that has been well documented. So I think that's another tool that would be at your disposal.
Very good. Mr. Verdier, thank you very much. As an Esquire, I'm an Esquire. I want to determine whether or not lawyers in the United States can be helpful to you. When I say lawyers, in terms of their public statement, national associations, etc.
You mean Liberian lawyers or lawyers generally?
Lawyers in the United States in particular can be helpful if they make statements to join with you and your organization.
Oh yes, that would be
under
helpful.
Under the rule of law.
Yes, Congresswoman, that would be helpful. And beyond that, the Bar Association, the American Bar Association is working with the Liberian National Bar Association in Monrovia. I think they have an office there, so they support the work of the Bar Association. And of late, the Bar Association in Liberia has gotten actively involved, taking the lead in the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. So I think they have some role to play in that, but definitely public statements, and in support at home and abroad will go a long way, and letting the government of Liberia know that what they are doing is unconscionable. There's need for justice, and corruption and impunity cannot continue to be the order of the day in Liberia.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Ms. Jackson.
May I ask Ms. Martin Capelli on the devastation that is happening to women and children in light of the slow process of establishing this court, the dangers, but also what has happened to them?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Thank you for your voice, and thank you for being a voice for us for the longest that I can remember. Let me first of all acknowledge President Biden. In 1986, he spoke and stood up for South Africa, for the humanity of man, the survival of mankind. In 1998, as a child, I listened to Maxine Waters as the lone voice speaking on behalf of Liberia. Today, I speak for the Liberian women. We need justice for the women, because what we have been told when a child is raped is that the parents compromise. I don't believe it is within the jurisdiction of the parents when the law has been broken. It is the responsibility of the government to make sure that each citizen within the four walls, be it the South, the North, the West, is protected. So there needs to be a fast track court set. Let me give a quick example. A young lady was harassed last year. Her name is Bevina Brooks by a sitting lawmakers. And she made a pronouncement and went public with that. He grabbed her and put her in jail. We had to intervene. The case never went anywhere. We hired a lawyer to represent her. She went to court. We have to stand with her. So We need the voices of women around the world, especially lawyers, human rights lawyers, to join their voice with the rest of us who are advocating to make sure every little girl or every woman gets a justice. Because I've done this strictly for years, but the last 4 years that women begin to talk. First, when we started, people like it's a shame that they want to talk about that because it would be shame. A common example: a 16-year-old little girl is selling a milk candy. A man comes in, grab a candy, took it, and said, "Come for your money." He grabbed her and ripped her. When her mother went to fight for her, the rest of the community joined her. A sitting lawmaker goes over and said, "If you make this public, our government will look bad." We, the women, again, turn around. We have to relocate these young women with their parents from their community because they're being shamed. They're victimized and they're re-victimized. How do we need all of the help, all of the resources, but we just don't want to move them from one community to community because then we are victimizing them twice. What we want is this particular War and Economic Crime Squad, the TRC, will answer all of these questions and the reparation. There is allegedly there over 60% of Liberian women are sexually violated before they reach the age of 10. Our babies are dying before they reach the age to even know where their bodies are telling them. So we need all of the help that we can get. Like I said, Congressman Smith has been a voice for us as we add our voices to, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson, we need your voice. We need your voice louder because Liberia respect the relationship that she has with America. Not only their relationship, you support us. You support our budget. You keep our country going. You give out over 100 million every year to our country. But it does not trickle down to the everyday woman or the everyday person. It goes back into the same people who have killed our people and sabotage our growth and our psychological mind or well-being. Those are the ones who pockets it goes to. I believe to fasting this, majority of the people in our Congress or in our government should not be allowed to come to the United States because United States is a place of law. When you rape a child in America, you're caught, justice prevails. You can't give people who do not respect justice to come to our country. This is my second home. This is the place that gave me hope. I may get in trouble if I ran into one of them, right? So I think they should have sanctions. They should not be allowed. They should not be given visa to come here. Where they build, let them build their country for all to survive and live well. Let every human be given a right. So we need the voices of women or men who support the rights of women and for female and children to add their voices also. But I think there should be an action. You're muted.
That, thank you so very much. My apologies. You're saying that this court established can have far-reaching impact into the current circumstances of Liberia, including this horrid number that you just gave us. 60% of the women and girls are violated before the age of, what did you say?
10.
Before the age of 10. That's what I have.
Yes.
You're saying the court could help that. That would be
Yes.
a problem with that. Thank you so very much. Mr. Muller, can you expand on your commitment to sanctions or your belief in sanctions being constructive at this moment? Mr. Muller?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Actually, as you said, what can immediately be done? And I will actually go back to my statement earlier, where from the administration standpoint, a statement by President Biden in just making the announcement and calling on Liberia to establish the World Economic Crime Court will send a strong signal. Additionally, concerning the Global MAC Act, sanction, which is individually targeted, I believe also will send a strong signal in also supporting the entire pressure campaign that is ongoing right now as we speak. Obviously, the Global MAC Act was imposed against Senator Barney Sherman, and I don't know the standing right now, but I still believe that the government of Liberia are not in the full understanding what that means. If not, he will not have been elected as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee of the Liberian Senate, which is actually an affront and undermining of the United States of America, as well as the people of the Republic of Liberia.
And so you think people are serving in government now with impunity and with no recourse, and they have been involved in these atrocities?
100% correct.
Well, let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding, and I know that we'll get these Zooms correct. We probably will soon be seeing each other face to face, and that would be very pleasing to me. I've missed seeing you in these hearings because of your strong commitment, and I hope you know of my strong commitment, which is why I wanted to emphasize to be able to be in. I know how Zooms are, and we are all engaged in Zooming. So this commission is important, and I would like to conclude by saying to Mr. Verdier, you said the American Bar Association. I don't know whether you've engaged the National Bar Association. I'm going to do that so that you'll have added organization of members of the African American Bar, and all of their subsidiaries might be very helpful. Many of the Liberian members in the United States, Liberian Americans, are members of that bar. Secondarily, Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. McGovern may not be on at this time, but I think and would like to raise for our commission an idea of a statement by the commission again relating to what we're hearing. I think it can be very effective in merely indicating that the court is long overdue for, and then other matters we can obviously discuss as a commission, but certainly I believe a statement would be appropriate for us to do collectively. And I thank you. I've heard you, Ms. Kapi, how do I get this, Martin Kapi? I've heard you, and I have been very vocal before. I've known all your presidents. I've traveled. We were very active in getting Charles Taylor out of Liberia so many years ago. So I'm appalled at these numbers that you're giving me, the brutality of women, and the using women as fodder, as raw material for sexual abuse from their early age. No human being should have to be violated like that. This is clearly a violation of international and domestic human rights, and we are the perfect commission, and others, Foreign Affairs Committee, which Mr. Smith sits and co-chairs, I'm sorry, as a ranking member on the Africa Subcommittee, that we can work together. And I intend to work together. I'm very delighted with this hearing, and I thank the two chairmen co-chairmen for this very important hearing. It emphasizes the vitality and the importance of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission in the tradition of the late Tom Lantos. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, my good friend Sheila Jackson-Lee, for your comments as well as your questions. They were excellent. And you know, one of the things that you and I so strongly share, and that is the whole issue of combating or pushing back against child soldiers. It's worth noting that George Boley was elected to the House of Representatives after being the first person deported from the United States under the Child Soldiers Accountability Act. So it just underscores this sense of impunity that exists. There are good members of the legislature in Liberia, but there are also some very bad apples. And unfortunately, they're in a capacity to frustrate efforts to establish this court, which is absolutely long overdue. I would also point out, and you might have some additional questions as well, Sheila, but you know, the false assertion that the financial cost of the court somehow lessens the attractiveness of it on the part of the government, George Weah's government. Perhaps one or more of our witnesses might want to speak to that. I don't think it's a financing issue. And I also, you might want to, and Dr. White, you might want to speak to this, because one of the things the court of Sierra Leone was that it not only brought justice to many, many people, including Charles Taylor, but it also established processes that were, that African lawyers, the Liberian or Sierra Leone lawyers, I should say, were able to get the best possible legal practices, investigative modalities, so that they could this protection, all the rest. So there was a legacy, not just ability for these horrific crimes, but there was also a legacy of a more permanent, sustainable, physical presence of good due process of law. So you might want to speak to that, Dr. White or Mr. Vadir, because I think that's an additional positive of having this court. That, as you all spoke of, this culture of impunity can coexist when you have a well-functioning judiciary system that holds people to account. It can try, and there will be some slippage. There's slippage in the United States as well, but you're more apt to have true justice. And that in and of itself, the law is a great teacher, can help mitigate crime committing. So if any of you like to comment on that.
Congressman Smith, if I could, since I was at the special court for Sierra Leone, I can tell you firsthand about the funding issue, and I can also tell you about the legacy initiatives that we had undertaken. Interestingly enough, Sierra Leone was not a former Anglophone country or former colony in the United States, yet this court was uniquely funded. It was set up by the UN, but the funding was done by donor nations. And the U.S. was the principal funder. The U.S. government funded over 1/3 of the special court's operations from beginning to end. And the appropriations came right through, at that time, Congressman Frank Wolf, who was my congressman at the time and a good friend. The appropriations came through them straight to State Department. So if we can do it for Sierra Leone, we can certainly do it for Liberia because of our historical ties. And in the heyday, even when we relocated our operations up to The Hague, when we were trying former President Charles Taylor, we were spending about $35 million a year. Now, keep in mind, there was a lot of travel costs, those types of things. And on the Senate side, where we've been working, we understand we provide over $30 million a year to Bosnia, for the Bosnian courts. So I don't think funding's the issue. We could, if we can do it for one, we can do it for the other. And certainly because of the importance, funding should not be an obstacle. We should be able to step in and help do that. Shifting gears on the legacy, although initially we had international staff in the key positions, eventually we hired continental staff to come in. So the majority of the staff ended up being continental personnel from people either on the continent of Africa or who had left and came back, both on the investigative side and certainly on the legal side. It's just important that the key positions, because of the high probability of coercion, bribes, and corruption and transparency, that the senior level positions, that's why I was indicating we'd already done it in Sierra Leone. The Secretary General appoints them, prosecutor, registrar, the majority of the judges, but we also had continental staff that filled some of these positions. So you develop this expertise. I know on the investigative side, a majority of my investigators, and we trained them 3 or 4 at a time, were from Sierra Leone. So we trained them how to do witness protection, witness management. That was probably one of our most critical legacy programs, was that we had over 600 witnesses at the special court. Not all of them testified, but the majority of them, very few, and none of them got hurt. And although some were threatened, nobody died, nobody. So we were able to do a tremendous job, teach them the right processes, the rule of law, and the people got to see this. And again, the majority of our witnesses remained in Sierra Leone, and they were protected by the Sierra Leone police who were seconded in working for us. So there's so many dynamics and good things that can come out of this that occurred right next door. We don't have to go to some other continent. This happened right next door in Sierra Leone. Again, it wasn't perfect, but keep in mind, we started from scratch. We started from scratch. Now we have a history. We've had lessons learned, some best practices, and right next door. And they're thriving now. Sierra Leone is moving on. So this is why it's so important that the Congress get involved, particularly with our historical ties. If you say make it happen, it'll happen. And you have funding mechanisms to make those things happen. And we can bring an end to this impunity and culture of impunity. And strongly, we can follow up offline. But certainly on the GLOMAG side, there's a lot. There's a lot of people, as Cindy said, from that government that travel here that have committed crimes. And they know about it here, but yet they travel here freely. They have a diplomatic passport. They fly in, they go to Washington, they go to Minnesota, they go to New Jersey, your state. They travel around with impunity. And these people have committed atrocities. They have blood on their hands, yet they still come in this country. That needs to stop. That needs to stop, to send a very powerful message that we won't tolerate that. So these are just a few of my comments. Thank you.
Well, just in follow up, if there were an earmark, we would have to scrub how much that should be, but it seems to me, even if we didn't wait for other nations to step up and provide funding, to front load this to make sure that money is not the object in any way, shape, or form. Do you think we're talking order of magnitude $30 or $40 million?
I think that's a safe bet based on our previous experience, and keeping in mind that was a lot of that was loaded up with travel costs and local per diem and things like that in Europe, as you know. But if it's set up in Liberia, which it should be, it has to be set up in Liberia, just like the court was in Sierra Leone. It has to be there because the people need to sense and taste justice. They need to see it and witness it. Certainly that would be a good start, and it would eliminate any of the arguments that you're hearing from the current government. They don't have the money, because that's an excuse.
Mr. Verdier, did you want to speak to that, or anyone else on the panel? Could you unmute, please? Sorry.
Yes, I said that we spoke adequately on the funding is not the problem. The government has not made a commitment yet. I remember a government minister has said that they do not have the money. So the question I asked, how much is the cost for doing this enterprise for which you do not have money? Certainly, there has to be an estimate, there has to be a study, there has to be a commitment. So I don't think that is the problem. And they know that there's been commitment from the international community that they will support the court. Recently, the Swedish government made a public statement that they are standing by and willing to support the court. And I think other Scandinavian countries have made similar diplomatic moves because they supported the TRC and they have come and said they will support the court. So funding is not the issue. Of course, funding is necessary, but the government has to make a commitment and determined to make sure that the process comes through. So it's just not the will. The will is not there. The moral authority is not there to see this thing through. The government is corrupt, and they believe that there should be impunity. They believe that because others in the past weren't held accountable, they wouldn't be held accountable. So they shouldn't institute such a mechanism that will hold them accountable.
Yeah, thank you. Sheila Jackson, could you unmute? Sheila, we can't hear you if you're.
Huge.
There you go.
Where I am not able to talk to the director, and it is absolutely insane. Whatever confusion you all have gotten into with us.
I think she's out of
to the director when I so choose, as I expect.
Would anybody else like to make a final comment before we conclude? Again, you've given us tremendous insights.
And you connect them through. That's fine.
Congressman Smith,
yes, Mike.
If I may,
Yes.
Obviously, once again, many thanks for your leadership. And as this commission is preparing in support of further steps. I just want to highlight also that the WIA-led government will most likely be trying to make a compromise and establishing only the war crime court in sense of negotiation. But on behalf of the people of Liberia, there should be no compromise, that it have to be the war and the economic crime court, because this is also going to send a strong signal concerning economics, concerning accountability as we move forward. So I just wanted to highlight those points, that there should be no compromise in sense of negotiation, only calling on the war crime court and leaving the economic crime court out of the game. Thank you.
Excellent point.
Okay, may I come in?
Please do.
Hello?
Yes, please do.
Congressman Smith, I want to say again, thank you. And again, I'm grateful. But when you go out to meet orders, remember the children of Liberia as you have always done. The majority of us, especially the girls and children, that will never grow up. Chronologically, we have. Emotionally, we have not. Psychologically, we are stuck in a cage watching our body develop while we grow old, while we die in pain, while we die with the pain of trauma, hoping for answer. At least that the next generation do not have to endure what we have to. And those that now that we can also make sure that in this generation, even those who are going through these experiences, can say there's hope, there's still humility around the world. There's still people who believe in human dignity and have compassion. And I believe all of you who came out today to hear us and those around the world and the US Congress hold our future, the future of Liberia, in her hands to make that difference, to send a strong message to the rest of the world, especially that region. No more, no more. We need justice for our daughters and for our mothers, for our children. We need for them to maximize the potential. They have the right to be protected, to be children, to grow and plan their own lives and have opportunity. And that's why I seek justice for all the girls who died. I seek that for me, the nights that I stay up and can't sleep, that my kids have to tell me, Yadi will be okay. I want them to know that it will be okay. That they will see this day justice, that justice will come to Liberia. That somebody have heard their story, that there's somewhere along this line that the world leader still exists, and that's the United States of America. Thank you for hearing us, and thank you for a glimpse of our story. It is not a full story, but that's an overview of our story. Thank you.
Thank you on that very eloquent. Unless there's anyone else who would like to make a point. Raise your hand if you do. Mr. Vidir.
Yes, in final remarks, I'd just like to say thanks to you and your colleagues for the leadership and the support. Without doubt, Liberia is declining. Liberia is failing as a country. Conditions have worsened. Public authority is very irresponsible. People do not trust government officials. Recently, the government dished out, I think, 1.3 million or so of donor figures to each member of the legislature. It was interpreted to us as a bribe to now support the current push for the War on Economic Crimes Code. So a minister took his share of it and decided to give it back to public service. He took it to the Ministry of Health and the COVID management team. He offered to give it to them. They received it, and the president, from my information, called them and told them to refuse the money. So they returned it to the senator. And he gave the proceeds he received to another public institution that is supposed to do public work. They refused it also, issue a brazen statement that they cannot accept the money from me. That's the level of public authority in Liberia. It has declined, has no moral compass. They have no sense of rectitude. Corrupt. The country is declining. All public institutions are down. Health, education, infrastructure, everything is down. They are focused on themselves. They are just of the public resource. They have accumulated onto themselves, and they are the only ones who are benefiting. Every day, there's evidence of crimes against humanity. The reports are overwhelming. So we are overwhelmed ourselves and documenting impunity. So they are investing in impunity. That's why they do not want justice to come to Liberia. And we thank you for the support and leadership. It is our prayers that Liberia will have justice someday soon. And we continue to share that hope. And your actions will support that sense of hope and courage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sheila Jackson Lake. Floor is yours.
I'm trying to be heard from sound. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I want to, as we sit here today, I know there are some updated reports, but I said this in my statement, but I want to just say it again from the Human Rights Report, Human Rights Watch, 2004. I'm going to now be digging deep for the current statements about the human rights conditions in Liberia. And I know that we face a number of these issues around the world. But when the report says thousands of children have been victims of killings, rape, and sexual assault, abduction, torture, forced labor, and displacement, their use and abuse was a deliberate policy on the part of the warring parties. We don't have a court and we don't have a government that would view that as an atrocity in and of itself, that it would be willing to set up the court post haste. As indicated, I think, in the United Nations speech, it was made public. And then now it doesn't exist. Mr. Chairman, I think there's something about keeping your word. There's something about children in the international arena. Right. As a very new member of Congress, I began to work on child soldiers. And I think my staff is going to go back and look at where we are and what we need to update. But the very fact that children in Liberia, these words are almost unspeakable. Killings, rape, sexual assault, abduction, torture, forced labor, displacement. Are they going to school? Are they safe in their schools? Is this being done quietly under the world's eyes and under the new president's leadership? And I think we have a very important responsibility, Mr. Chairman, to try to, out of this single hearing, we've had many, there are many issues that we are contending with. But I hope that the governor, myself, and you will be able to raise this issue up with an immediate statement that I hope we can discuss. If that minimally brings some worldwide attention, I think we've made a first step. I know there are many things you've done. As the witnesses have said, you've been a strong voice. I've been equally working on this, but I look forward to work even more. But I'm just stunned by what is happening to children and that this court has not yet been set up. I think we have a moral responsibility to do so, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for yielding to me, and I thank the witnesses, Mr. Verdier, Mr. Muller, Dr. White, and certainly Cindy Martin Kinepsi. I hope that we're near the pronunciation. Thank you so very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I say to my good friend from Texas for her work and we will do that letter and statement. And I also think we should be contacting the Biden administration. You know, they have a lot of balls in the air. I think it would be very helpful if we did a statement asking again that the president very forthrightly calls for the creation of this long overdue court. And I thought, Mr. Mueller, your point about not leaving out economic, I thought was very well taken. And of course, Dr. White, you know, the importance of legacy, not just for accountability, but also for all future court cases, that they be done properly and with the highest possible standards of evidence and protection of witnesses was very well taken. And all of you were just outstanding in your presentations. Thank you so much. If anybody else would like to make a final comment, otherwise we'll end the hearing. Okay. Thank you so very much. The hearing is adjourned.